Good morning, Teachers on Fire. I hope you're doing well this morning. My name is Tim Cavey. As you may have just heard there, I'm an 8th grade teacher, assistant principal, and the host of the Teachers on Fire podcast. I'm trying another new thing today, and that is the No Pressure Book Club. And I'm so excited to be joined by Ryan Racine. And Ryan, you stepped up at the last moment to try this with me. Thank you so much. Would you introduce yourself? Talk about your context.
Yeah, thanks. So I am a high school teacher based from Ontario, Canada. I am currently, I think I'm in my 4th year of teaching, and I'm teaching in the alternative education setting. And for those who might not know what that is, it's basically students who are working outside of the traditional K to 12 system. So they have been either suspended, expelled, or for other mental health reasons are not working within the traditional ed schools. So they come to teachers like myself, and we work on their academic and social emotional goals. And yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at in my teaching. I've also taught part-time as an instructor at the college level. I've taught as a TA at the university level. So I think in total I've taught JK to higher ed at one point or another within the 4 years. So.
That's pretty remarkable.
Yes.
Right there, JK, all the way to higher ed. Jake says, love the podcast. Thank you so much, Jake. First time catching us live. All right. Good morning from Texas. Well, good morning from Ontario and BC as well, and around the country. Rochelle, I believe tuning in from Pennsylvania. So welcome to you as well, Rochelle. All right. So this is a very new thing, new format, new show. We're trying the No Pressure Book Club, just simply getting together to talk about great education books that have been inspiring us lately. So Ryan, we said off air that we would sort of ping pong back and forth. Would you start us off and talk about one of the titles that you've been reading and something that's been inspiring you recently?
Sure. So the first one I have here, Strive for Happiness in Education, written by Rob Dunlop, and he is a teacher in my school board. Actually, he is an elementary tech consultant, I believe, and so I've met Rob a couple times, and I've talked with him over the phone. And his book, I think, is very unique. It was published, I think, within the last year or two, and what he's doing is he's applying the field of happiness studies and positive psychology to the teaching profession. So if you go to like any bookstore right now and you look at the self-help section, it's filled with happiness studies books from like the Happiness Equation, Happiness Advantage. So he's taking the principles from happiness studies and applying them to teaching. And I think it's very powerful because I know in the job I have, so often we think that happiness in teaching depends on external factors, such as we have to have the right circumstances in place. We have to have the best students. We have to be teaching the right course for ourselves in order to be fully happy. But what he basically outlines is that, no, we have to take responsibility for our own happiness. And he includes a bunch of practical strategies like habit making, carving out time for gratitude. There's a whole bunch of them. Exercises you could write into the book. So I love that because I'm super into mindset. I'm a runner as well, a long distance runner. And so when I'll read a lot of like mindset books related to just general, but also running. And I see a lot of those principles resonating, within Rob's book here about just trying to maintain that resiliency and trying to take responsibility for, again, your own happiness. So Strive for Happiness in Education is definitely a book I think you should check out.
I'm already enjoying this. I'm so excited about this show. I'm going to be building my wish list, which, by the way, Ryan, I don't know about you, but as an English major and a lifetime reader, it's kind of an addiction, right? It's a little bit of a problem that I constantly cannot buy them as fast as you want to, or read them, by the way.
So I have a new rule for that because especially when I was in grad school, I was buying books like crazy, and I'm like, I'm not saving anything. So my new rule is, first of all, if I could borrow it, I will borrow it before buying it. But also, if I'm interested in the book, I go on Spotify or iTunes and I try to find the author doing a podcast and talking about the book first so I could get a preview. And then if I like it, then I buy it. So it's a bit of a process for me now.
That is really smart. You kind of force yourself to do that vetting first, which is
Yeah.
that little bit of extra work and prevents the impulse buy. I've tweeted before about the one-click purchasing on Amazon is a little dangerous. So, all right. Well, that was a great one. I'm going to keep that open in its own tab so I can return to it later. All right, these are the 3 books that I'm going to be talking about this morning. And I said to Ryan off air that I want to be able to show you the covers because I don't have the physical books. I do all of my reading on Kindle, but I'll talk briefly about this first one. And one of the reasons why I enjoy reading on my Kindle is because it stores all of the highlights. Are you a highlighter, Ryan, as you go through books?
Definitely I use the pencil. The pencil is my bookmark, so I'm
Okay.
just marking up the book, but same deal. Yeah, I have to mess up the book in order for it to become mine.
Yeah. All right, so I've got a few highlights, and again, hacking. So I'll talk about hacking assessment first of all. I guess a little bit of context. It's nice to be able to share a little bit more since it is just the two of us this morning. So assessment is such a big deal, as you know, Ryan, in education. The landscape is always moving, and it feels like it's been moving quite a lot, even in the last 5 to 10 years. And so I'm currently in a gradeless middle school context, pardon me, but we are constantly trying to improve what we are doing in terms of evaluating on a proficiency scale, using learning targets in everything we do, and that changes our report cards, of course. So hacking assessment has been really helpful along the way, one of a few books, and I'm part of the way through this one. It's by Star Saxteen, and she's been briefly on the show as well. I've had a few conversations here on the roundtable about assessment, and I'll see if I can share my screen, which is not very helpful, I realize, for the podcast listeners. But I will read out a few quotes and just give you a bit of a sense of this book. So again, it's called Hacking Assessment, and the full title is 10 Ways to Go Gradeless in a Traditional Grades School. So that's kind of a unique pathway because Star talks about how she brought about a gradeless environment or gradeless practices, even though the school and the district hadn't gone that way. And so that's not my current experience. That's pretty bold. That's pretty revolutionary. But I'll read a few quotes that I think give a bit of a flavor for her writing. As we rid ourselves of the grades, risk-taking and questioning became a natural part of the process. Another one, rigor doesn't necessarily have to do with the amount of work assigned, but rather the difficulty and intensity of the problem or project. As she writes, after seeing increased student commitment to learning once grades were eliminated, I'm constantly reminded of what truly motivates students: challenge, interest, and expectations rather than a teacher's rules. So again, Ryan, we haven't talked about this, and I don't know where you are on the assessment philosophy. We can still be friends, even if you still support a traditional assessment, for sure. But I find this book really, really thought-provoking. And again, it's coming from, and I think Star has done graduate level work, but it's coming from someone who has lived it. She's done the work. She's done the practice right at the classroom and school level. And she talks about how you can actually bring different practices into a school or district environment. So it's written in and this is something we'll talk about as we go forward as well. You've done graduate level work yourself. You know that probably most of your colleagues, if they're honest, are not super interested in reading graduate level or graduate feeling work that is riddled with citations and extremely academic, right? And so I would say Star has the backing. She has the research backing, but it's written in the teacher-friendly language that makes it highly accessible. So highly recommend Hacking Assessment. Ryan, over to you. What's your second pick today?
Second pick is Lit Up by David Denby.
Okay.
David Denby is, I think he's retired, but he was a film critic, pretty prominent in the States, as well as a journalist. And he's doing something really unique here, I think. He wrote a book in the 90s called Great Books. I have it on my shelf. I'm looking at it right there. And basically, um, his whole kind of concept behind that book is he wanted to go back to college and basically sit in the great books classes and just get get an education from his own vantage point, from being like a middle-aged man compared to like a freshman in college. So it was his way of just going back and getting kind of like re-education and seeing how his perspective on some of these works has changed since he's aged. And so he took that idea and applied it to high school. So basically, this book, he goes into a number of different high schools and he just sits there. And I think he did this over a 2 year span. He would just sit at the back at a desk and he would just record what would happen in the room. So he would record interactions the teacher had with the students, and he would record the engagement the teachers had with the students, and the different assignments they did. And I think it's really unique because I thought about this a while back, and I was speaking to fellow teachers about this. As teachers, unless you're like a student teacher, you never see other teachers teaching anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You notice that in terms of being able to learn about pedagogy and practice, you're able to talk about it within PD sessions, but rarely do you ever, on say your prep time, go into another teacher's class and just watch them teach, just to learn from them. So this book is really unique because you actually get to see narrative accounts of teachers doing great things. And the teachers are very diverse. They teach at very diverse schools. The first one is a prep school in New York City. The other ones are more like low social economic status. But I think, first of all, I love David Denby as a writer. So he really brings the book to life. You actually feel like you're sitting in the classroom watching things at work. But it's just such a unique book compared to anything I've ever written because, again, you're getting that firsthand experience of watching great teachers teach. And a lot of these, I think, are award-winning teachers as well. So, yeah, David Denby lit up. I highly recommend, especially if you're an English teacher, because everything's focused on English and literacy. And it's a fantastic book and a really interesting approach to writing an education book.
That sounds really cool. I like your point that we do not get enough opportunities to learn from each other. In the whole professional development conversation, and people in other industries might find this strange to learn this, but teachers can go decades, literally decades, without really experiencing other classrooms, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is unfortunately a common phenomenon. So we've got to do a better job. And I'm speaking as a part-time administrator myself. I've got to do a better job of creating that space and time for teachers to actually just sit in with their colleagues. And there also has to be some culture building around that as well, right? To make sure that is a safe experience for all parties concerned. But Ryan, I think I was making a mistake with my screen sharing earlier. So could you hold up the book cover again?
Sure. I think the title you showed was like a different version of it, but I think it's the same book. Yeah.
Same
Yeah.
book.
Just going off that point, I think it's interesting because a couple of years ago, I was in the NTIP program, New Teacher Induction Program. And part of the program is you find a mentor teacher and you could actually sit in their classes for like a couple days and just watch them teach. That was the most valuable experience I've ever had. I just sat there like a fly on the wall, didn't have to teach anything, and literally just took notes, or just being able to see that teacher's rapport and reflect on what do I have to do better was absolutely amazing. And it'd be cool if, administrators, and a lot of them, some of them do this, but if, I've heard stories where some administrators will say, hey, you know what? I'm going to step in this period. I want you to go and see this person teach. Right. And it'd be such a unique experience. And I think in order to grow, you kind of need to see that. It's like musicians or athletes watching other people do their work. You learn so much from that. And I think as teachers, we could do the same.
And when that principal comes in and says that, that teacher who the principal is saying, hey, I'm taking over, go down the hall and watch this person. You can't take it personally, right? Like you gotta have this culture of growth that says, oh, thank you so much. What an opportunity. I would love to learn. And it's not about it's not about being X or being that person, but it is about learning from other people. I'm a big believer in the idea that everything we learn and do is remixed from other influences. So every teacher's style is going to be a little bit different, a little bit unique, and that's okay. We learn from each other. I love this comment from, let's see if I can bring it back here, from Mina, who says, I started recording myself teaching to scrutinize my teaching practices. That's commitment, Mina, to do that completely of your own initiative. There's a company called Sibme that I worked with at a previous school that actually has built a platform. It's sort of an instructional coaching platform where as a teacher, you set up a phone or a tripod at the back of your room, and you just record yourself for whatever 10-minute window you want to. And maybe you're focused on a particular part of your teaching, and then you upload it to an instructional coaching platform. And then your instructional coach, hopefully who is in the building as well, will give some comments, and you kind of have some feedback around that video that's contained in their page. Anyway, it's a unique idea because video is very powerful, and sometimes as teachers we don't realize all the little ticks we have, or the fact that we're ignoring this student over here or whatever it might be. Yeah, and Mina says, I miss those days. I still ask my colleagues for permission to watch them teach. Oh, that is awesome. So she's obviously, Mina, you've got some great relationships. Yeah, you've got some great relationships with your colleagues if there's that level of trust. I really appreciate that. Okay, the third book, Ryan, that I wanted to share today is this one on the far right. It's called Teach Better. No, I'm getting ahead of myself. It is the one in the middle, and it's called Flash Feedback by Matthew Johnson. So Matthew Johnson was also on the show recently, and I'm not trying to do him any kind of a favor or just genuinely enjoying his book. And so he is, Ryan, you're the right guest today because he is another English teacher. Are you familiar with Matthew and his work?
I'm not, no.
Okay, so he is a high school English teacher. He's not super well known, I feel like, although perhaps that is starting to change. But he really gets into his experience of just overload as a high school English teacher in terms of trying to keep up with reviewing student work and grading and marking. And he talks about living by the ocean and sort of looking out his window at the ocean, but knowing he was stuck inside with this mountain of marking. So just as I did for hacking assessment, let me see if I can share a few quotes from that book. Again, going to my Goodreads account where these highlights sync. All right, so we've got flash feedback. I'll hopefully share the right tab this time and cut the feed when I should be. But so this is, again, Flash Feedback. The full title, Responding to Student Writing Better and Faster Without Burning Out. And of course, have to love that, as my brand is Teachers on Fire. So I'm always on the lookout for what sets teachers on fire and prevents burnout, and anything that can improve student learning in that process is pretty valuable. So yeah, right off the top, he writes here, I was already overloaded with planning, teaching, meetings, data collection, email, and the myriad other tasks that a teacher must do. I knew I couldn't sustain this paper load and continue to be an effective teacher, let alone a decent partner, friend, parent, and human. And I laugh, but this is real stuff. This is real life for lots of English teachers. It can be depression, it can be deep discouragement. And so, yeah, and then he's tracing his journey. He writes, this left me with a really hard question. How could I help my students make significant progress in their writing without burning myself out in the process? I'll skip down a little bit. A great many students have learned that the reason to write is primarily to get a grade. That's really profound if you think about that. If that is the system we are constructing, then we are removing the joy and the power of writing to some extent. And we're teaching students that grades are the wage that you should expect at the end of your writing. And so how can we bring back the joy, the passion, the deep personal resonance that writing can have for every person. And maybe that's as far as, okay, let's try one more quote here. There is no way for a teacher to read 30 minutes to 60 minutes of writing from 159 students every day. Trying to do so courts burnout or makes it more likely that the teacher will eventually limit the amount of writing she assigns in an effort to keep up. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing that screen, but you get a bit of a sense of the table he's setting for this book. And then Matthew gets into some tactics and strategies that he follows. And again, there's sort of two purposes going on. One is to save teachers from themselves, and the other is to actually improve student learning. And, you know, for many years, I was that English teacher who, and I still struggle with this to some extent, but when you see mistakes across a page, and Ryan, maybe you can speak to this, but isn't it tempting to want to address or put something by different, you know, by almost every mistake, because you feel like you're doing students a disservice if you let that slide? Or how do you respond to that?
I think it's all context based. So when I taught part-time at the college level, I was teaching a first-year communications course, and most of my students were like English language learners. So if I'm taking their paper and just absolutely ripping it apart for small grammatical things, it's just going to frustrate them, and they're just not going to read the whole thing. So I think it all goes back to the criteria you set out. So is the criteria to be able to craft like a logical argument and weave it through this this paper? If that's the case, then just focus on that rather than all the nitty gritty things, because again, too much read, you're going to frustrate the student. And I remember going back to grad school, and I mean, I signed up for it, but when I got like a proposal back that I sent for like a grant or something, or my proposal for my master's thesis, and it was just all marked up, I was frustrated. I didn't want to look at it at the time. So I can't imagine a person in K to 12 looking at a paper that's just completely marked up. It'll just frustrate them. So I think you have to pick your battles and figure out what the criteria is, and don't go overboard with certain things.
That's definitely something Matthew spends time on in the book, is really keeping the learning target in focus. And as you said, if it's logical arguments, focus on that. If it's organization, focus on that. Or if it is mechanics, focus on that. But or maybe some specific part of mechanics. But yes, the ugly paradox is that in English teaching, sometimes the more red ink we put on a page, the faster it goes in the garbage when students get it back. All right, Ryan, let's go to, unless you wanted to add something there.
I was just going to say that's interesting. I have another book I'm not going to mention, but it's called I'm not going to get into as one of my books, but it's called The Slow Professor by Barbara Sieber. And she was actually one of my professors in grad school. And she talks about the pressure all educators have on productivity. So I feel sometimes as teachers, we feel being productive means marking up the page as much as we can. That shows that we've done our job, when in fact that might not be the case. We need to take more of this, I don't want to call it a minimalist view of marking, but we don't need to just completely, mark up the page to show that we're doing our job. There's other ways we could do that, whether it be through oral feedback or through more poignant descriptive feedback. So, yeah.
That's really interesting. Margaret Murray from LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us this morning, Margaret. She writes, usually I have students send a pic of their writing to me in Teams, Microsoft Teams she's talking about, and we have conversations about how to improve their writing pieces. That's really interesting too, because I know in my world, we're a Google environment. And so I get all of my students to, basically I'm pushing out Google Docs through Classroom, and then everything is sort of contained within that environment. I wonder if there's an advantage. Margaret, tell us more if there's an advantage to using pictures versus docs. I'm curious about that. But one thing that would do, Ryan, it strikes me as a teacher, is if you're just dealing with a picture, maybe you're just making one or two comments. And maybe that's part of what she's getting at, is it just keeps it that much more focused and efficient. All right, Ryan, take us into your third pick today.
This one, and I haven't read it in a while, but I feel it's relevant, especially with the the pandemic and teacher stress. It's called Managing the Inner World of Teaching: Emotions, Interpretations, and Actions. It's by Robert Marzano and I believe his wife, Jana. And Marzano is a pretty big writer in the field of education. But this is, again, a very unique book because I've noticed so far that there is tons of books about teacher self-care, as there should be. But there are not many books out there in terms of actually getting into kind of the CBT elements or being able to actually interpret your emotions when you're in or outside of the classroom. It's more just, okay, take time to practice self-care. But I think we really need those exercises to kind of unpack why we think a certain way in the classroom, why we may think negatively about something. So this book, it's very thin. It's not too long, but I think it's great because, again, it uses a lot of practices like CBT, and it basically gets you to reflect on why you might have a certain interpretation of a student, of a colleague, of a particular stress. It gets into something called like creating scripts for yourself. So sometimes a lot of stress is derived from not properly planning out how we're going to react when a student says this. And that's why I'm a big proponent of, I do this at the beginning of each day. I journal and I write down things that could go wrong throughout the day. And I say, if this student says this, or if I'm given this possible activity to do, how will I respond? Will I just lash out? What will I say? So I actually sometimes write out a small little script that I may say in order to keep calm and in order to ensure like the class is safe. So that book really gets you to reflect about your own emotions in the classroom. And I think it's very rare. I haven't really seen many books that do this, that talk about the inner world of teaching. So that's kind of my pick there.
I love that too. I'm all about emotional maturity. I think we're all on a journey there. When I say that, I don't mean to suggest that I've reached, the finish line by any stretch, but tailoring that specifically to the teaching context, I think, could be really valuable. That publisher, and now Marzano is a name I've heard many times. I feel like, do they do conferences as well and professional development events? Or are they just?
I think so, yeah. I think from what I understand, Robert Marzano worked at a pretty prominent publishing company before, and then he ended up branching off and creating his own publishing press. And I think they do a bunch of PD for people. So yeah, his name is sprinkled everywhere. So I think he dabbles in a bunch of different things. I think he has he either works or has his own research center dedicated to professional development. So I'm sure some people have heard of his name already.
I'm looking at the Amazon page, and he is listed along with Jana Marzano, who is probably a sister or a partner. So that's very cool as well. Okay. Well, over to my third pick, and this comes from my friends at Teach Better. I am pretty close with Jeff Gargas. You'll see his name there in the bottom right, and Ray Hewer, Tiffany Ott, Chad Ostrowski. Actually, Chad is the only one I've never had on Teachers on Fire. But just to give you a taste of this book, the book opens with, let me take that off the screen. The book opens with Chad telling a story about telling a student to get the hell out of my classroom. Is kind of how it opens, and just a very real, raw moment. And so, as I've done with my other two books, let me share a few highlights from my Kindle. See if I can make my way over there. And yeah, I'll give you a bit of a taste of this book. So, and one of the things I'll say right off the top too, and you'll catch this flavor, is that growth mindset in my journey and my path, Ryan, really changed my thinking in such a revolutionary way that when I'm asked on this podcast and on others what my number one pick for educators is, actually, speaking of books, my number one pick right now is Mindset, and has been my number one pick for a few years. So Mindset by Carol Dweck, it completely changed the way I look at adversity and learning and curiosity and brain plasticity, and it was revolutionary. So I catch that spirit in Teach Better, just in their name and in this book as well. But here are a couple of quotes from that book. It seems simple, like flicking a light switch, but focusing constantly on ways to improve isn't necessarily easy. We have to be okay with imperfection and failure, and we need to constantly evaluate ourselves and our ideas in the classroom. That next one, pretty similar theme. Let's go down to this quote. Deeply examining and breaking down the standards into leveled learning targets is hard. It's not a fast process, and it will likely leave you feeling like your brain is fried, but it is a critical part of designing exceptional learning experiences and is well worth the time and effort you put in. And maybe I'll read one more. Oh yeah, I like this chapter. Rather than planning out what you will do Monday through Friday each week, throw out that calendar and think of what steps your students will take on the journey toward understanding. And in that chapter, they're really focused on, getting away from the script and making your teaching a little more student-centered. And one of the things that Teach Better as an organization is really big on, and really was part of the origin of their story, was something called the grid method, which is all about laying out learning objectives in a grid and then allowing students some control over the pace that they work their way through those objectives. So again, you just come across that theme of making learning student-centric as much as possible. I just want to bring up Dr. Wanda Humphrey on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Wanda. She writes, love the idea of a team approach. I gave descriptive feedback in Teams via email. Oh, she's a little bit behind on the show. That's all right. I want to expand on what has been said this morning and incorporate Zooms to share feedback as appropriate for the assignment. And Ryan, we talked off air about just jumping back to that topic for a moment. You're in the remote learning space, correct?
Yeah.
Right now. How has that been for you? I know you have some students who face different unique challenges. They're coming from different places. How has their, let's say, Zoom literacy been like? and what's that been like to give feedback over video conference and these different tools?
Yeah, so we use Microsoft Teams for our video. I find something that I've been using that helps a lot are using breakout rooms. Because you could actually kind of privatize that experience. And myself, I'm giving most feedback orally as well. I find we use the D2L platform in order to submit assignments, but students don't usually go onto D2L and look at the feedback you may give there. So a lot of mine they're on the spot kind of in person, well, not in person, but oral feedback I give. So I tend to break students out into those breakout rooms. Luckily, I have 2 AAs in my room who help supervise the students, and I bounce between the rooms. But at times, I will just work with that student within the breakout room and give them some feedback on what they did before. It's also just, I find it's not necessarily about overwhelming them with feedback, and especially at this time, because some students, you're lucky that they just signed in for the day. So yeah, it's very different for each student, the approach I have to take. Some students are not actually meeting live like remotely, which is totally okay based on their particular circumstance. So I have to be more flexible with them. But I think at this point, it's all about flexibility because as we've learned, it's, the academics sometimes have to take a back seat because we are in the middle of a pandemic and there are more pressing issues at times. So well-being for students becomes a bigger factor.
We were so strong on that back in August. I wonder if we've lost a little bit of that focus on SEL first, or something you see a lot on teacher Twitter is Maslow before Bloom. And that was something we were committed to for this school year. And Ryan, we've almost made it. We're here in the month of May, and I'm sure you finish in June as I do as well. So it's actually been, all things considered, it's been a pretty successful year. Well, Ryan, this has been so much fun. Maybe before we sign off, we'll do a couple of things. One, I'm going to throw my titles up on the screen, and then could you have your books ready? And we'll just do a quick recap of the 3 titles you shared. Sure. So I shared these three: Hacking Assessment by Star Saxteen, Flash Feedback by Matthew Johnson, and Teach Better by the whole Teach Better team: Chad Ostrowski, Tiffany Ott, Ray Hewart, and Jeff Gargas. And I shouldn't say the whole team, because there are 20 plus people in Teach Better. I sort of lose track of how big they are, but these are the 4 original founders, and they have put together this book from the classroom. It's gritty, it's inspiring, it's practical. And so all of these 3 books have been tremendously encouraging to me. And Ryan, back to you. Let's take one more look at your 3 titles. So again, they were?
The first one was Strive for Happiness in Education, Robert Dunlop.
Right.
Second one was Lit Up by David Denby. And the last one, Managing the Inner World of Teaching by Robert and Jana Marzano.
Thank you so much, Ryan. This has been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed our conversation today. Can I invite, if I ever do this in another month or 2, can I invite you back sometime?
Absolutely. Yeah. I say this all the time. I miss the seminar environment of post-secondary school, where you can just get together with people and talk about books and talk about what you're interested in. So this was great.
All right, awesome. Well, let people know, as we start to wrap up today, let people know how they can connect with you. I know you're not huge on Twitter, but you do have a presence there, which is awesome. And what are some other ways people can reach out? Or do you have a website, or tell people what you've got going on, or what's the best way to connect?
Sure. So I have published some poetry in the past. For all those who may like poetry, simply Google my name, put poetry, and there'll be different publications that come up. In particular, I've written a couple articles for University Affairs. One of them was one of the most read articles, I think the second most read article last year. And it was all about my transition from post-secondary to teaching. And so you just Google my name, put University Affairs. I published another article as well with them. I published an article about Stoicism and Stoic philosophy, and how that helped me while I was a student. And so if you're interested, that's actually, I think, a recent poem I published for this Niagara publication that I'm from. So yeah, just look up my name, and like I said, University Affairs, poetry, I'll come up. I'm in the process. I've just finished a manuscript for my first book, and it's being looked at by a publisher. It is about mindset. So something I'm really passionate about, in particular, how ancient philosophy can actually help us build a strong mindset when it comes to teaching. So I'm going to be looking at some practices from a particular ancient philosophy, and I think it's something new that some people aren't really doing right now. So I love the process of writing it, and excited to see where it may go.
I'm a big fan of English teachers that don't just teach it, they live it and they model it. So that's really, really cool, Ryan, that you are doing all this work. And I look forward to sort of following up and trying to fit a few of those links that you mentioned into the show notes and YouTube description. Speaking of YouTube, Jake is watching over there, and he says, this was fantastic. Thank you for the recommendations. Well, thank you for joining us today, Jake. And for all those watching on the replay, we appreciate you. Ryan, I think we'll leave it there. Take care, my friend. Enjoy a wonderful weekend, and we will talk again soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, stay safe. Thank you.